If you wish to help, we would be happy to join your coalition.
The entire history of the Coalition of Planets. Ages ago, the Viltrumite Empire was on a galaxy-wide conquest spree. The Viltrumites were, and still are, a race of super strong, near-invincible beings who looked human but were far deadlier. They'd stomp across entire star systems and demand submission, or offer planet-wide annihilation. A choice not easy for most. Needless to say, wherever they went, alien races and entire planets either bowed down or got wiped out. It was a harsh, brutal regime, and it seemed like no one could stop them. But one Viltrumite named Thaedus was done with the ways of his empire. He saw his empire's violence for what it was, a horrific tyranny that crushed civilizations just to expand Viltrum's power. So he did the unthinkable and nigh impossible. He straight up assassinated Emperor Argall, yes, the emperor of the Viltrumites, and threw the empire into chaos. You can imagine the shockwaves the assassination sent. The top dog of a warrior race got killed by one of his own. Civil war broke out among the Viltrumites, and in the confusion, Thaedus managed to slip away to create a multi-planetary body called the Coalition of Planets to stop the Viltrumites once and for all. And in this video, we're gonna explore the entire history of this coalition. Before I continue, I have a very small request. Please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 puny little clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you these marvelous videos. And now let's begin. Formation of the Coalition of Planets. Needless to say, Thaedus wasn't content with just going rogue. He wanted to take the fight to his former people, or at least stop them from overrunning more worlds. So he went around to planets that had been hammered by Viltrumite assaults, worlds that were tough enough to resist or lucky enough to survive, and pitched his idea to band together and fight back, or eventually die alone. That's how the Coalition of Planets took shape. Thaedus set it up as a defensive alliance at first. The main deal was simply to unite in common cause against the Viltrumites, pool resources and knowledge, and try to stall the Empire's advance before it devoured the entire universe. Early on, the coalition was small. Planets like Europa, home to Alan the alien's race, jumped aboard right away. The Unopans, by the way, had their own way of fighting back. They had started a breeding program to create a champion strong enough to slug it out with Viltrumites. Alan would eventually become that champion, the only success story of this breeding program. Another early member was Geldaria, whose rock-skinned inhabitants also felt Viltrum's wrath and were itching to join any alliance that might stand a chance. At that stage, the Coalition's only real mission was to survive. They wanted to slow down Viltrum's expansion, free some worlds that were still under the Empire's thumb, and, best case scenario, find a permanent solution to the Viltrumite problem. Over the centuries, the Coalition grew from a ragtag cluster of planets to an extensive network of thousands of member worlds. Everyone understood that if the Viltrumites weren't stopped, no planet was truly safe. People rallied around Thaedus' banner, and pretty much saw him as the driving force that might one day topple or at least stall the great threat in the galaxy. Thaedus and the early moves against Viltrum. Thaedus quickly became a legend among non-Viltrumite species. He went from being labeled the Great Betrayer by his own people to Great Thaedus among countless other worlds. He hid his Viltrumite identity most of the time, so that new allies wouldn't freak out about a Viltrumite in their midst. Still, rumors swirled. It was hard to keep that sort of thing a total secret. But as time went on, as member planets saw how determined he was, his ancestry mattered less. They needed a leader who understood the Viltrumites from the inside out, and that was exactly Thaedus. He wasn't afraid to play dirty. One of the most drastic and controversial things he did was creating the Scourge virus, basically a biological nuke aimed at Viltrumite DNA. The Coalition developed it by taking samples of Thaedus' own genetic material. The result was a virus that, once released, spread like wildfire among Viltrumites. It killed 99.9% of them, sparing only a small handful who somehow had some kind of immunity or resistance. Basically, many from the royal bloodline survived, which is why when the updated strain hit Mark, aka Invincible, later in the comics, he didn't die. Oh yeah, Mark was a descendant of Argall, and Omni-Man, or Nolan, was Argall's son and heir. Coming back to the Scourge virus, sure, it sounds like genocide, and it was, but from the Coalition's perspective at the time, it was an act of desperation. The Viltrumites were unstoppable in direct combat, so the Coalition used the only tool that could strike them at their core. This virus permanently changed the galactic balance of power. Viltrum went from having an enormous, unstoppable army to limping along with a few dozen survivors. Everyone in the Coalition had reasons to cheer. Maybe the war was finally winnable, but it also fueled the Viltrumites' hatred and made them even more vicious in their attacks. They never forgot who had engineered that nightmare plague. During these centuries, the Coalition fought a long, grinding conflict. Lots of ambushes, skirmishes, and quick hit-and-run missions. They'd free a planet here, sabotage a Viltrumite outpost there. They had to remain cautious, because even with their numbers, a single Viltrumite warrior could wreck an entire fleet if given the chance. But the virus gave them hope that an all-out victory was possible down the line. As new planets joined, the Coalition's defensive lines expanded, and their leadership structure grew more complex. Telescria became the capital world, home to the Coalition's High Council. Thaedus presided, and each planet got a representative to shape policy. Alan the Alien, the Unopan champion. One of the Coalition's most iconic heroes is Alan the Alien, a one-eyed Unopan who turned into the group's greatest champion. The Unopans had craved a champion who could stand toe-to-toe with a Viltrumite. They ran a special breeding program, but it almost always failed. Only Alan came out with the superhuman durability and power they needed. He was a bit of an oddball, goofy, full of curiosity, but extremely loyal to the Coalition's cause. Early in his career, the Coalition assigned Alan to be a champion evaluation officer. He'd hop from planet to planet, sometimes by mistake, as we'll see with Earth, testing each world's strongest defender. The plan was to figure out if that planet had any shot at surviving a Viltrumite attack. Alan's job was part spy, part scout, part ambassador. If he decided a planet was too weak, the Coalition might offer extra support or urge them to join the Alliance. Alan's visits to Earth eventually led him to become buddies with Invincible and introduce him to Omni-Man. But that's skipping ahead a bit. The main point is, over time, Alan showed so much tenacity and heart that he climbed the Coalition ranks. He became second in command to Thaedus. Then, when Thaedus died in the thick of war, Alan ended up running the entire show. Some called him Great Alan, although he found that title a bit embarrassing. Omni-Man's shocking defection. On one of Alan's missions, he found out that Earth's greatest hero, Omni-Man, was secretly a Viltrumite who had been stationed there. This was part of a standard Viltrumite infiltration strategy. Send an agent to a planet, let them cozy up, then take over at the right time. Except Omni-Man had grown to love Earth and married a human woman. They had a half-Viltrumite child, Mark. So Omni-Man decided the Viltrumite plan to conquer Earth was horrific, and he turned his back on his people. Alan took that news back to the Coalition, and as you can imagine, it was major. The Council was thrilled and a little stunned. A full-blooded Viltrumite had deserted. It suggested the Empire's hold might not be as ironclad as everyone believed. They also found out that Mark Grayson was half Viltrumite, which meant another potential ally if he chose to reject the Empire. The Coalition was quick to try and reach out to him. Viltrum didn't take kindly to his defection. They arrested Nolan, intending to make an example of him. Alan, eager to free a potential key ally, got himself deliberately tossed into a Viltrumite prison so he could orchestrate a jailbreak. He pulled it off. He and Nolan escaped together. They fled to Telescria, where Nolan met Thaedus face to face. Seeing another Viltrumite who had turned against the Empire blew Nolan's mind. He gladly teamed up, sharing secrets about how many Viltrumites were actually left. Spoiler, not a lot. In fact, you should check out our other video on why there's less than 50 Viltrumites left. I've detailed a 3-point reason in that video.
His name is Mark, and he's only half Viltrumite.
Mark Grayson enters the picture. Of course, Nolan's defection put Earth in the crosshairs. The Coalition realized Earth's champion Mark Grayson might join them if push came to shove. Mark was young and naive about this whole mess, but he carried real power as a half Viltrumite. Actually, he was as close to a pure-blooded Viltrumite as anyone could get. Alan reached out, and eventually Mark learned about the Coalition's existence and what his dad had done. This was huge news for Mark. He'd seen his dad vanish and thought he might never come back. Mark decided to head to Telescria himself. He joined hands with Alan, Nolan, and the Coalition on a few missions. They recruited allies like Space Racer, a grizzled warrior who would spend centuries harassing Viltrumite soldiers, and Tech Jacket, a human kid with advanced alien armor. There was also Battle Beast, a super strong alien who lived for combat. Alan promised him epic battles against Viltrumites, and that was enough to get him on board. Each new recruit gave the Coalition a little more muscle. The Viltrumite War. All these smaller story threads merged into what is called the Viltrumite War, a full-scale conflict that the Coalition had anticipated for ages. Actually, they dreaded it, but you know, it was bound to happen. They chose their moment carefully. Nolan's intel said the Viltrumite population was dangerously low because of the Scourge virus. There might have been fewer than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites still alive, so Thaedus decided it was now or never. He set out to strike Viltrum at its core. While they were still somewhat weak, the war arc covers a series of brutal clashes. It starts with the Coalition hitting Viltrumite outposts, then building up to a final assault on the planet Viltrum itself. We're talking about a huge combined force. Coalition fleets plus special heavy hitters, like Nolan, Mark, Alan, Battle Beast, Tech Jacket, and Space Racer. Their objective was basically to topple the entire Empire. If they destroyed Viltrum, they figured the Empire would collapse. They got their wish. In desperation, Thaedus, Nolan, and Mark punched straight through Viltrum's core at insane speeds, thanks to Space Racer's cosmic rifle, which could propel them even faster. This catastrophic stun front caused the planet to explode from within. That must have been quite the Big Bang. But victory was brought at a huge price. The Viltrumite Grand Regent Thrag, essentially the top military boss, fought back like a cornered beast. He killed Thaedus in a savage personal act of revenge, ripping his head off right there on the battlefield. The Coalition, mourning their founder, retreated. The planet was in pieces, so from a strategic standpoint they'd won, but it didn't feel like a total victory. Viltrum was gone, but the Viltrumites were not. They scattered around the galaxy, and Thrag was very much alive. In the aftermath, there was an uneasy truce. The Coalition was battered, and the Viltrumites had lost their home. Nolan became the one to broker peace. If the Viltrumites agreed to stop conquering everything, the Coalition would spare them more destruction. Mark helped negotiate this. The war ended, kind of, with both sides licking their wounds. It seemed like maybe the galaxy could breathe for once. Thrag's return and the Thraxan War. But you know how these stories go. Peace never lasts. Thrag, stripped of his official regent title, refused to surrender. He vanished into deep space, looking for ways to rebuild Viltrumite power. He found it on a planet called Thraxia, whose insectoid queen was all too happy to mate with a powerful champion if it meant producing stronger offspring. Thrag fathered a whole new brood of Viltrumite hybrids, essentially forging his own little empire. Alan, now at the helm of the Coalition, saw what was happening and realized the threat wasn't over. The Coalition aligned with Nolan, Mark, and the Viltrumites loyal to them. Yes, there were friendlier Viltrumites by now, to stop Thrag's fanatic quest. We call this clash the Thraxan War. It wasn't as drawn out as the original Viltrumite War, but it was vicious. Thrag's forces included a swarm of hybrid children, and they poured across the galaxy. Battle Beast squared off against Thrag in a legendary duel to the death. Both of them inflicted brutal wounds on each other. Battle Beast died, and Thrag walked away bloodied but still lethal. This set the stage for the final confrontation near Earth's sun. Thrag ended up killing Nolan in front of Mark. Of course, Mark didn't just sit there and watch. Their battle was intense. Mark eventually took Thrag down for good. That ended the last major Viltrumite threat in the galaxy. With Thrag gone, the Viltrumite race was left under Mark's leadership, and the loyalists who followed Nolan's ideals. Mark promised that the Viltrumites would do anything and everything in their capacity to change Viltrum's dark legacy. No more oppression, no more empire building. Instead, he wanted them to protect the galaxy, to use their power the way heroes do. The Coalition's political side and how it all worked. Let's pause the war stories for a second and look at the Coalition's actual setup. They ran like a massive interstellar federation, with Telescria as the capital. That's where the High Council met, a group of representatives from each member planet. They'd debate policy, hammer out budgets, propose missions, and vote on big steps like whether or not to go to war. At the top was a leader, originally Thaedus, then Alan. This leader often doubled as the face of the Coalition's military, guiding strategy in times of crisis. Over the centuries, something like 1,750 core planets joined up, plus thousands of colonies. So it was no small group. Planets big and small got a voice. The Coalition valued liberty, law, and mutual defense. Anything that smelled remotely of tyranny was basically an instant reason for them to intervene. They also had a bunch of specialized roles, like champion evaluation officers. That was Alan's old job, traveling to prospective worlds to see if their defenders could hold their own. The Coalition offered help if they looked too weak. That's how they kept tabs on the universe, making sure new or vulnerable planets didn't get blindsided by Viltrumites or other threats. Yes, there was some shady bits too. A Viltrumite spy once infiltrated the High Council and leaked intel that nearly got Alan killed. In fact, this spy was someone Alan was beginning to fall in love with. This forced Thaedus to tighten security, so the Coalition had its share of intrigue. But overall, it was a serious force for good. After the main conflict with Viltrum died down, they tried to help rebuild devastated planets, weaving them into the Alliance. In many ways, it was like a cosmic version of the United Nations, though more militarized thanks to the constant threat of invasion. Allies from Earth to the stars. The Coalition teamed up with all sorts of folks to keep the galaxy safe. Their main enemy was obviously the Viltrumites, but they also faced random warlords, cosmic threats, and other menaces. If someone was out there trying to dominate entire worlds, the Coalition wanted to put a stop to it. Earth ended up a critical ally. Even though Earth didn't officially join right away, it had powerful defenders. Omni-Man, once he defected, and his son Invincible. Earth also had Tech Jacket, a kid who stumbled onto an advanced alien suit that gave him impressive combat abilities. All that muscle turned out to be crucial in several big showdowns. Then there was the Battle Beast, who, honestly, was a bit nuts. Obsessed with combat, he roamed the galaxy picking fights with powerful foes. Alan offered him a chance to fight Viltrumites, which was like dangling candy in front of a kid. Battle Beast hopped on board. Also, Space Racer had a personal vendetta against Viltrum. The alien literally roamed space for centuries, using his unstoppable rifle to harass Viltrumite soldiers. Once the Coalition found him, it was an easy sell to get him fighting by their side. Some alliances were more surprising, After the dust from the Viltrumite War settled, parts of the old empire started cooperating with the coalition. Under Nolan's leadership, some Viltrumites recognized their old ways were a dead end. This led to the unthinkable, Viltrumites standing shoulder to shoulder with coalition troops. But the biggest curveball was Mark eventually inheriting leadership of the Viltrumites. Imagine the coalition's reaction to that. Sure, Mark was an ally, but he was also half Viltrumite, which raised eyebrows among more paranoid coalition members.
You shaved your mustache!
Stay away from my planet!
Important events where the Coalition shined. The Coalition of Planets appeared in countless important moments throughout the Invincible comic run. One of the earliest big ones was Alan's comedic yet important trip to Earth, where he fought Invincible by mistake. He'd mixed up Earth with Urath. That was how the Coalition first made contact with Earth's defenders. Down the line, Alan returned to Telescria and reported that Earth's champion was half Viltrumite, and that Omni-Man had deserted Viltrum. This triggered a major turning point in the Coalition's intelligence on the Empire. If a Viltrumite had truly bailed, maybe the Empire wasn't as solid as they assumed. Right around that time, Viltrumite agents ambushed Alan, nearly killing him. That told the Coalition they had a rat in the council. They'd started feeding false intel around to see who would leak it. Another spotlight moment is Nolan's prison break. Alan let himself get captured so he could free Nolan from a Viltrumite holding cell. Their subsequent arrival on Telescria gave the Coalition a massive edge. Nolan dished out key details about Viltrumite tactics, numbers, and vulnerabilities. Suddenly, the Coalition had a real shot at a full-on offensive, and so the final push toward the Viltrumite War began. During the war, the Coalition fleets battled Viltrumite forces head-on, defended Telescria from infiltration, and lost a lot of good people. We see council members personally suited up and fighting because the stakes were that high. Once they destroyed planet Viltrum, the Coalition negotiated a ceasefire that ended open hostilities. Everyone was too drained to keep going, especially after Thrag took out Thaedus. So in effect, the Coalition accomplished what it had set out to do centuries ago: bring the Viltrumite Empire to its knees. Though they never really destroyed them, they broke apart the Empire's stranglehold on the galaxy. The Coalition's tragic final stretch. With Thrag gone, you'd think the Coalition could finally celebrate, but it didn't go smoothly. Alan had grown suspicious, maybe even paranoid, about having so many Viltrumites around, even if they were friendly now. After all, the Coalition had spent eons fighting these guys. Alan couldn't shake the fear that they might revert to type and overthrow the galaxy again, so he did something drastic. He considered deploying the Scourge virus on Earth, where the remaining Viltrumites were blending in with humans. This plan nearly tore the galaxy apart. Nolan tried to stop Alan from unleashing that genocide, and they fought. Alan overpowered Nolan, leaving him critically injured. Mark got wind of this, flipped out, and it led to a final confrontation between the Coalition and Mark's Viltrumites. Old friends like Tech Jacket and Space Racer clashed with Mark. Family loyalty split. Mark's younger brother Oliver actually sided with Alan at first. It was a painful fiasco, basically a civil war pitting two groups that had once been united. Fortunately, it didn't last long. Alan realized he was about to repeat the same atrocity that the Coalition had once committed: mass murder by virus, and he backed off. That ended the war, but the damage was done. Everyone saw that maybe the Coalition had outlived its original purpose. They'd formed to stop Viltrumites from conquering the universe. Now the Viltrumites were mostly on a better path, and the Coalition was about to commit a crime that rivaled anything the Empire had done. People decided it was time to walk away from the old alliance structure. The dawn of a new era. Coalition dissolves. By the final issue of Invincible, that's issue 144, the Coalition of Planets disbanded. They'd pretty much gotten what they wanted. The Viltrumite Empire was no longer a cosmic bully. Mark Grayson led the surviving Viltrumites with a promise to protect, not conquer. Worlds that were once in mortal fear of Viltrum suddenly had superpowered allies watching their backs. The cycle of violence finally broke, and folks felt they no longer needed a giant war-focused coalition. So the Coalition, as an official entity, called it a day. They'd freed countless planets. They had carved out an era of peace, and now they would trust Mark and his people to keep it that way. Some of the former member worlds stayed in touch or cooperated informally. Alan stepped down as a wartime leader, and presumably took on a more advisory or diplomatic role afterward. He and Mark reconciled. Earth became the new, quieter center of the Viltrumite population. Mark, for his part, traveled around doing what the Coalition had always sworn to: keep the galaxy safe. The Coalition's legacy lived on through these connections and the values of unity and protection that it championed for centuries. Even though it didn't exist on paper anymore, the spirit of the Coalition remained in how the new Viltrumites approached their role in the universe. They'd keep an eye on trouble, step in before it got too big, and try to avoid the old pitfalls of the Empire. Thus ended one of the longest-running alliances in galactic history. An alliance born to fight evil, survive unimaginable horrors, and ultimately discover peace was possible after all.
Who told you that? I mean it. I'd really like to know.
Epilogue, how it all ties together. So that's my version of the condensed but hopefully thorough story of the Coalition of Planets. In the end, the Coalition stepped aside because it wasn't needed anymore. Mark Grayson, a half-Viltrumite raised on Earth with a moral compass pointing toward doing the right thing, took on the responsibility of guiding his people. He made sure their incredible power was used for defense, not conquest. That irony, Viltrumites as protectors, was the final cherry on top of a story that started with them as ruthless conquerors. Nobody at the founding of the Coalition would have believed it. Today, in the Invincible universe, you'll find a galaxy at relative peace, or at least free from the shadow of a monstrous empire. Planets keep forging ties with each other, some out of old Coalition habits, others because they're allied with Mark's new group of Viltrumites. And that's it. The Coalition of Planets had its glorious rise, waged wars that shaped galaxies, and then gracefully bowed out. If you ever run into Alan the Alien or Mark Grayson out there in the cosmos, they might tell you the full gritty version of each battle or infiltration. See you next time. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!